Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Illicit Feminine. I'm your host, Elizabeth Marth, and we are going to be discussing wounds and forgiveness today. Illicit in the way that I do not believe that people really understand the importance of forgiveness. And it isn't so much about forgiving other people. So let's just dive right in. Relationships are something that as humans we thrive on. Relationships are necessary for our health, they are necessary for our survival in a lot of ways. They are necessary for fun and joy. Relationships can also be a source of pain, they can be a source of trauma, they can be a source of high emotions, anger, rage, grief, abuse. Connection with another person is a full spectrum of good and bad and everything in between. Well, I want to talk about that today. I want to talk about relationships in the form of when we feel we have been betrayed in a relationship. Betrayal is an interesting thing. On a spiritual level, I don't know that it completely exists, meaning that when we are so true to ourselves, when we understand our connection with God, when we understand our connection with ourselves, I don't know that it is physically capable that another person can betray us. They can act in a way that is a betrayal of them, and they can act in a way that can be viewed as a betrayal of us. But if we're so secure in ourselves on the spiritual level, I do. I hold the belief that I don't know if another person can betray us. Not popular, I understand. But I'm going to break it down into the human level because on a human level, we can absolutely experience the feeling, the thought of betrayal, whether it's an illusion or not. So, oftentimes, when we are feeling betrayed, it is because something within us has been activated. There is a wound within us that we are being shown we need to deal with. So, initially, with betrayal, there is a victim of the betrayal and there's a betrayer. And the victim of the betrayal they feel angry, they feel disappointed, they feel confused. I'm kind of really breaking down the feeling of betrayal, right? Because you can feel betrayed, but what's underneath of it, right? Rage, insecure, a loss. It can be very big disruption in our life, in our emotional well-being. In that, we can see the betrayer really in only one way. We can only see what they did to us. And I want to shift the perspective a little bit because there is an imbalance of power within the quote unquote victim, the person who was betrayed, and the betrayer. Unfortunately, in relationships, there's always going to be a dynamic of some sort of betrayal between the two people. It can be that I told you I was going to be home at dinner for 6 o'clock and I didn't show up till 7 o'clock and I didn't call. That's really a betrayal, right? Like that's me not keeping my word. It can be something as large as an affair. It can be something as an abusive situation. It can be a quality of time issue. It can be anything, but essentially it's that I'm not showing up in the way that you're expecting. I'm not showing up in the way I said I would. I'm not doing something that I said I would. Somewhere our contract of things that we agreed upon was broken. And that can feel really shitty. The thing is, we can view it only in the way that it feels bad and that something was done to me, or we can look at it from the perspective that God, the universe, a higher power, is reflecting back to us an area of our life that we need to grow in. Often, when we are betrayed, we are in some way betraying ourselves. And this is where the conversation gets illicit because this isn't a conversation that I think has had enough. It's really easy to hide us betraying ourselves, us abandoning ourselves, us not listening to ourselves and blaming it on somebody else. This is not a conversation about abdicating responsibility for the other person, but it is actually about when we feel betrayed, how we can shift the perspective to understand that we, in some way, shape, or form, are not listening to ourselves. We are betraying ourselves in some way, shape, or form because our intuition always knows at some point. It's also giving the betrayer way more power than they deserve. Nobody deserves that much of our power. Nobody deserves that much of a hold to have that much energetic hold on us to have the ability to make us feel so bad. That's when we aren't being enough of what we need. It also is a conversation about us holding responsibility, us owning our own shit, and not owning somebody else's shit. One of the things that I have learned and am still on a journey on is that it has been so much easier for me to own the entirety of the problem because that was my coping mechanism when I was young. That was the way I dealt with any sort of chaos, was that it's so much easier if it's just all my fault, because then I don't have to set up boundaries. I don't have to hold the other person accountable who was incapable of being held accountable, which then feels even worse. So it's these dynamics that form in childhood. And that's where our wounding comes from, right? When we are feeling betrayed by somebody, it is some sort of wounding just generally that happened in childhood that is a pattern that is showing up for us to heal later on in adulthood. What do you do about this? Where am I going with all of this? I am going with the place of we need to understand our part. We need to understand that when we are not listening to how we feel, when we are not listening to what we need, when we are not listening to what we desire, and we're putting all of those things externally, like we expect someone else to know how we feel, we expect someone else to know what we need, we expect someone else to know what we desire. That is abdicating our authority of ourselves. We are the ones that get to know how we feel. We need to be in connection with this. And we are so disconnected oftentimes from how we feel. We're disconnected from what we need. We're disconnected from what we desire because we're putting other people's needs ahead of our own. It's not that there's not a time and a place to put other people's needs above our own at times, but that is not a way to live consistently. So we get to start listening to ourselves. We get to start listening and finding out what is true for ourselves. We get to start paying attention to ourselves. That is less of a chance then for somebody to hurt us in such a great way, where we feel so betrayed by another person and it sends us down like this deep hole of depression, anxiety, of not being able to get out. Where are you feeling betrayed in your relationship? And where can you see where you are not paying attention to yourself, where you are not showing up for yourself, where you are not making yourself a priority? Because that is going to be reflected energetically in another relationship. When we don't think we're important, people in our lives will energetically show up to not think that we're important. When we aren't listening to ourselves, people in our lives will energetically show up not listening to us, not making our needs a priority because we aren't. The other piece of this is, where are we not necessarily treating other people the way that we want to be treated? So if you're not being listened to, where are you not listening to yourself? And where are you maybe not listening to other people? If you feel like nobody's showing up for you, where are you not showing up for yourself and where are you not showing up for other people? So it always comes back to us looking at ourselves, not making ourselves wrong, not shaming or blaming ourselves, but looking at like where we are energetically, where we are relationally, where we are emotionally with ourselves. Then we can look at the situation and really name like what boundaries were crossed, what behavior was displayed that is a non-negotiable for you. What behavior was displayed that you are willing to have a conversation about and maybe come to, I don't like the word compromise. I don't know that we need to compromise, but a balance around with the other person. Where can there be a conversation of the actions of the other person not being okay with you and what your expectations are around it, And is that something that the other person is willing to do? The next step to this is the forgiveness factor. A lot of times we do not understand how important forgiveness is. So we may have some shadowed sides around forgiveness. There's the truth, right? Like that forgiveness is necessary in order for anything to move on. Forgiveness, the biggest rule of thumb for forgiveness is that it needs to be within ourselves, which is why we need to do the work when we are feeling that we have been betrayed. We need to do the work around forgiving ourselves once we've identified what I mentioned earlier. Once we identify where we're betraying ourselves, how can we forgive ourselves for that? How can we let go and not blame or shame ourselves? And what's an action step we can take to make sure that that doesn't happen again? That's like an amends. That's like a promise to ourselves that, hey, I am going to listen to my feelings from here on out. I am not going to allow someone to completely yell at me in public and humiliate me. I am not going to allow that type of behavior. This is the personal growth work that we need to do within ourselves. Then it is forgiving the other person. And sometimes forgiveness with another person isn't something that is meant to be done in a physical one-on-one conversation with somebody else. There is another practice that I want to share with you, and this is an energetic forgiveness. It's like an energetic cord cutting. There is a necessary place to have a conversation and forgive the other person for what you felt was done wrong to you. And it can be done in a more of a mental mindset, in a meditation where you are able to say what you need to say, you are able to forgive, and you are able to energetically cut the cord between you so that you can take your energy back. Now, this doesn't mean that you need to sever the relationship that you have with this person. It may need to close the loop on the relationship in the way that it is, but there can be a new creation of a relationship if that is appropriate. There can be a new creation of new boundaries, of new ways to do things, of new practices and conversations to be had. Forgiveness definitely needs to be a piece of the repair work, as are the amends, which are what are you going to do to make this situation different than it once was before. I hope this is helpful when you have come across some sort of betrayal in your relationship, because it is going to happen. It is the one thing that is true about relationships, because we will always have our own work to do. And the people in our lives that we are in relationship with, part of their purpose is to be mirrors for ourselves, to show where we need to work on showing up for ourselves more. And it's a mirror for where we need to work on showing up for others more. I hope this is helpful, and I look forward to seeing you on next week's episode.